Next up, I'd like to introduce Mindy Hansen with Alpha Pixel Reach as our business spotlight. Mindy has been volunteering her time on multiple task force teams, offering free classes to help with marketing, helping businesses go through this epidemic, and has been instrumental in helping the chamber walk through this difficult time as well. So thank you so much to Mindy with all your support, and we really appreciate what you've been able to bring to the table. So thank you very much. And I'd like to allow you to jump on and give us an update on what's going on with Alpha Pixel.
Thank you. And it's been fun to be involved in some of the task force and helping other businesses figure out how to navigate this interesting time. Mm-hmm. We've been very fortunate in that we've been able to work with a lot of local nonprofits, and I see some businesses on here that we're working with. And it makes us feel good to be able to help you, especially during these times when things are uncertain. A lot of local businesses haven't in the past used digital marketing or have used it very limited basis. And so it's been good for us to be able to jump in and give you some guidance and some support. We are offering, just so you all know, Thursdays at 3 p.m. we're doing free classes. They are through Zoom, and you can find out about them on the Chamber's website, goconifer.com. And each week we pick a different topic. It could be how to use social media for your business, how to successfully use electronic newsletters. And if you have a specific digital marketing topic you're interested in, shoot me a message, and I'm more than happy to see if there's other people interested in that and do a class on it. But they've been really well attended, and they've been actually a lot of fun to put together. So I'm going to do a quick screen share here. I promise I'm not going to, Melanie, can you make me a co-host so I can do my screen share real fast?
I can.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
So just so you all know, we are a digital marketing, I don't use the word agency because it's me and about 2 people that help me out from time to time. So agency seems like a big word, and that's not what we are. But we do all digital marketing. So we can help with your website, social media, electronic newsletters. I like to say any message that you want to send to a client or a potential client through their phone or the internet, that is the messaging we can help with. And the important thing about that is a lot of organizations and companies will offer just websites, or they'll help with just your electronic newsletter or just your digital advertising. But that makes it more difficult on you because you have to make sure that your brand identity and brand message stays consistent. And we're able to work across all of those platforms and really help keep your branding consistent and make sure that your client is seeing the same message from everybody, everywhere that they see you. So I promise I'm not going to do a whole bunch of stuff, just a couple quick ones, maybe. There we go. I like to tell my clients not to tie themselves in knots trying to figure out how to do their digital marketing. There's a lot of different ways you can get your message out there. And one of the biggest mistakes we see is people trying to do all of it at one time right when they start. And all that does is leads to frustration and confusion, and usually eventually people just give up altogether. So like I said, we do everything from web design. Electronic newsletters are really, really, really successful and good bang for your buck right now. So that's one thing I'm suggesting a lot of people do. And we really like to work with small businesses and nonprofit organizations. Our favorite client are the mom and pop who maybe need our guidance and support at first, but then want to either learn how to do it themselves, and we're more than happy to teach you how to do it, or they want to, they end up so busy, they end up wanting to have us just continue doing it for them. So we really work with everything from consultation, training, we'll partner with you on it, or we'll do all of it for you. And because it's me and a very small team, and I work out of my house, so I don't have a lot of overhead, we can be very, very budget sensitive. So that's kind of who we are, what we do. We do work with quite a few of you, so anybody who's on this call, I see some familiar faces. Thank you for working with us and trusting us with your marketing. And let me know if you have any questions. We're happy to talk to anybody at no charge just to kind of help you figure out where to start.
Excellent. Thank you, Mindy. And if anybody is using Mindy's services, Alpha Pixel Reach, if you could post it in the chat, that would be fantastic, just so that she can feel some love, feel some chamber love this morning. Up next, I'm going to introduce our speaker. I reached out to the Colorado Small Business Development Center, which the office that I reached out to was out in Boulder, to connect with somebody that could help us walk through the next steps of the PPP. And lo and behold, I was introduced to Brian Ormsby. And it turns out Brian lives right here in Conifer. I got to meet with him last week or the week before, I think it was last week, for coffee. He was my first face-to-face meeting back to normal. So I was pretty excited about that. But Brian, thank you for joining us this morning. The rules for the PPP are rapidly changing, and I've heard from a number of members that just were overwhelmed and confused and wanted somebody to kind of walk them through what was going on, how it affects them, and you are the expert, and I would love to get you to share all of your insight. And Brian, he's gonna go through his presentation, then we'll open up for a Q&A. So Brian, I'll give you the screen.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, so I've been working with the Boulder Small Business Development Center now for a little over a year. And so when COVID started, they asked if I could help and if I would be one of there's two basic experts on PPP and EIDL loans at Boulder, myself and Dan King. So both of us have been keeping up with nationwide webinars, the U.S. Treasury reports, and trying to keep everyone informed. So the latest rules actually changed last week when Trump signed a amendment to the CARES Act. Basically, this amendment was designed to make forgiveness hopefully simpler and easier. I don't know that it is any simpler, but it should be easier to get forgiveness through the latest. And so I've got a little presentation that kind of walks through that. And what my plan is here is to go through the presentation relatively quickly and then open it up for questions, because I'm sure that, even going through it, there'll still be some questions open when we get through here. So let me share that screen. Here we go. And I may need to move pictures over so I can see. Okay, so everybody should be able to see my title slide, which is Payroll Protection Plan. And if you can't, give me a holler. And then we will start to roll through this if I can get it to let me switch. Okay, so here are the new rules. And this came out, like I say, it was right a week ago. And then the Department of Treasury Wednesday night put out clarification of those rules. So you can go to this source at the bottom, home@treasury.gov. And this PPP fact sheet is a constant update by the Department of Treasury. So it continues to get longer as they continue to change things. So it has things basically from the beginning. It says this is what we started with and this is what's changed and so on and so forth. So that can be helpful. It also can be confusing trying to figure out where the changes come in. So the PPP covered period, now what they've done is they have distinguished between what they call the disaster covered period and the forgiveness covered period. So the disaster covered period is February 15th now to December 31st, subject to change anytime they decide. But this particular period is now retroactive. It used to be March 17th, I believe. So now they've backed it up a little bit into February 15th. And one of the things that they did on the original loan is said the payback period was 2 years. So it was a little confusion when the new rule came out saying that the new payback period would be 5 years. However, that's only for loans where you received your money after June 5th, which the majority of the loans actually got let prior to that. Now, with this new rule, they also encouraged people who do not currently have PPP to apply, and applications are still being taken until June 30th. At June 30th, there'll be no more applications. So if you did not apply for PPP, think it still may apply to you, especially with the new rules. This is a good time to contact your bank and get an application in. So this deferral period is the other thing that changed on the rules. So there's a little bit, it gets a little convoluted here because I'm going to drop down to loan forgiveness and talk about the 8 or 12 week covered period, and then I'll come back to deferral. So originally when PPP came out, you got your money. From the date that you received your money, you had 8 weeks to follow the rules and spend your money, and then ask for forgiveness. So now they have changed that to also a 24-week covered period. Now, as it appears right now, the guidance says that you either stay with the original 8-week covered period or you go to the 24-week covered period, and there's nothing in between. So you're either on the original plan or you're on the new plan. Either way, the split from 75-25, 75% spent on payroll, 25% spent on other expenses, has now switched to 60-40. When that originally came out, our senator here from Colorado made note that it was a cliff, and that was something that they were not happy with. That when, and I say it's a cliff, if you didn't hit 60%, nothing would be forgiven. Was in the old plan, if you didn't hit 75, they would forgive this at a ratio. Say if you got 80% of that, they would forgive 80% of your loan. So since that came out last Friday and this Wednesday, that has been changed. So it is graduated. So if you only hit 50% of your payroll, you will get forgiveness at some lesser rate. But with the new rules of 24 weeks, there shouldn't be any reason not to hit the numbers. And that was the intent. The intent was to extend the period so that maximum forgiveness could be achieved. So now let's talk about the deferral period. Deferral period is when are you going to start making payments? Now this could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. If you have a loan that was given to you prior to June 5th, the entire period is 24 months from the date that you got the money. So if you have that loan and switch to a 24-week covered period, you won't ask for forgiveness until after the 24 weeks are over. At that time, your bank has 60 days to respond to your forgiveness request. And what they do, their response is sending it to the SBA, which has 90 days to respond back to the bank. Once the SBA responds back to the bank, the deferral period is over and payments start. So if you wait the whole 24 weeks, and then you have 10 months to request forgiveness after the 24 weeks are up, and then the bank has 2 months and the SBA has 2 months, you will end up with, if you have an unforgiven amount, you will end up with 2 months to pay it back. So be cognizant of this time. It is probably not in your best interest to wait a long time to request forgiveness, because if something is not forgiven, the payback period could be very short and the payments could be very steep. The other thing here is that if you do not request forgiveness, now we're expecting every bank to prompt people to ask for forgiveness, but it's still your responsibility to request forgiveness. If you do not request forgiveness in the 10 months of the deferral period, then it will just divert to a loan at that time. So I did kind of allude to this a little bit. The PPP proceeds is now 60-40 instead of the original 75-20 split. So now the 60% is payroll and payroll related items. I've got some definitions about what those are on an upcoming slide. And then the 40% is rent, mortgage, interest, and utilities. Now, take note of the fact that I used 2 different terms here. Minimum 60%, which means that you have to have at least 60% in payroll. And then the difference between whatever that number is and 100% can be rent, mortgage, and utilities, which means that you can get forgiveness, this being 100% payroll costs, no rent, mortgage, utilities. So if you're like several people who've mentioned already, you know, Mindy or Sharon, who work from home, don't have high rent, things like that, then you can get it all with payroll proceeds. Now, the new thing has come up here because there's been many, many questions about how can I use my money? This borrower certification is now part of the program. Regardless of when you got your money, you are subject to this certification. So the funds will be used to retain workers, maintain payroll, make mortgage payments, lease payments, utility payments. And then I understand if you use it for anything else, that's so it is clear that this is the only thing you can use that money for. So it's, there used to be a lot of questions about, hey, can I use this to pay off my old credit card debt, even if I turn it into a loan, and so on and so forth. And they've made it very clear that even if you turn this to a loan, at some point you need to burn it down with one of these authorized payment things. So, I mean, it's easy enough if you let it run long enough, you'll have enough payroll expense on your books to show that that's where the money went. Now there's got some definitions here, but we talk about where the money went. A lot of people get confused about that. You don't have to create a separate account. You don't have to do anything like that. What you have to do is have some tracking system. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be, you know, a QuickBooks program or QuickBooks Online or Xero or something like that, so that you can say, hey, look, I spent this money. You don't have to trace it back to the PPP funds per se, but you do have to show that you did spend that money during this time. Okay, so eligible payroll. Gross wages, bonuses are allowed. Wage increases are allowed. Your unemployment for state and federal, workers' comp, any retirement benefits, healthcare, life insurance, basically anything that goes into someone's payroll is authorized, with the exception of Social Security and Medicare. So the 7.625% that you pay as paying half of Medicare and Social Security does not count. And the reason it doesn't count is there is supposed to be an application coming up here where you can ask for forgiveness of that during the period. So we'll see how that transpires. But at this point, everything that you pay in terms of payroll is allowed to be included in that 60% number with respect to FICA and Medicare, or without FICA and Medicare. So what is eligible payroll for an owner, a partner, and a sole proprietor? Because this is different than a normal employee. If you're one of these three, owner, partner, sole proprietor, which is pretty much everybody in the room, you are governed or restricted to the wages you reported in 2019 on W-2 and or the profit that has come through on your tax return. So if you're an LLC or sole proprietor and you do a Schedule C, that would be the net profit on line 33. If you're a partner, it's going to be the net profit on line 22 of your partnership return, which is the 1065. And if you're an S Corp, you would get a K1, which is box 1, which is your distributions. So if you have both, then it is the cumulative effect of both of those. You can have, some people have W-2 wages and they have a K1, which is okay. So the deal is here is if you take, and I'm just going to use W-2 wages, for instance, and I will use $60,000 a year because that's easy. It's $5,000 a month. So if you had a W-2 last year with $60,000, you're an owner, that is the maximum monthly, $5,000 that you are eligible to claim out against your PPP forgiveness. So if you stretch that out to 24 weeks, now this becomes a large number, probably much larger than the PPP loan. You do not have to pay this money if you're an owner, a partner, or a sole proprietor. All you have to do is endure the time and say, that was my expense in 2019. So if you're in hard times right now and you can't afford to pay yourself, that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to, if you're the kind of person that just takes draws, you do not have to take draws during this period. You just use the number from 2019, and that is your forgiveness number. And that is as we understand the rules today. Also, for owners, partners, and sole proprietors, you have the opportunity to generally give a little bit more to your IRS, or it's supposed to be IRA, sorry, not IRS, to your IRA, a SEP, 401k, if you have Roth, healthcare, any of these things that you contribute to, you can use that for your forgiveness. So if your net on your Schedule C is 0 or less, and you're like, well, now how do I get forgiveness? Well, you could pump up your retirement plan. You could throw money into your retirement plan and it would be forgiven. So at least you're getting the money and it's not going back to the loan. So that is a decision point that you can possibly make by at least, paying yourself that for a future date. Okay, so talk a little bit about what other expenses are, because those have been confused. There are basically two. One is your lease and a mortgage. So if you own, then your qualified mortgage expense can be taken. And when they talk about qualified mortgage expense, if you have mortgage interest due to, or penalties or something like that due to not paying, or points or things like that, those are not typically qualified expenses. It's just the interest on the running mortgage. Now, again, any of these other expenses, rent, mortgage, utilities, had to be something that you had prior to the disaster date, which is now February 15th, right? So if you didn't have rent prior to February 15th, you can't count it now. They made that rule to keep people from adding things solely for the purpose of being able to pay for them with PPP. So if it's something that was in existence prior to February 15th that you were doing, then you can claim it as another expense. So your lease, your rent, your mortgage interest, and then utilities, and then other insurance is not related to payroll. So if it's in payroll insurance, then you would put it on the top side. But if it's other insurance like key person insurance or liability or bonding, you can include that in the 40%. Okay, so I've got a few areas I want to talk about. This is just kind of a brief list. And then once I get through with this list, we will be done and open for questions. So big area people talked about, the complications of unemployment. If you had people who you had to lay off or were impacted somehow and they were put on unemployment and you got PPP money, the rules say that you are to recall them from unemployment and bring them back. However, they may not come back because unemployment was very lucrative, at least until July 31st it will be, because they're getting an extra $600 a week. And that is generally more than most people were paying their employees. So if you have someone in that situation, you can offer them a job back. And if they don't come back, the rules of PPP also say that you're supposed to turn them in. I don't recommend that. That's a good way to make an enemy in a hurry. So I would send them an offer letter, ask them to send you a formal denial, inform them that you accept their denial, but you're not authorized to hold that position for them. You can use that offer and denial as part of your full-time equivalent count. I'll get into that a little bit later. But if you bring them back on and then the pandemic lasts longer and your 8-week period is over and you decided you're going to stay with the 8-week, then they can go back to unemployment. If you go to the 24-week, then the extra money that the government is giving would be over by the end of the 24 weeks. So going back to unemployment probably would not be a lucrative offer for them. So it probably won't happen. But if they refuse to return and you hire somebody to replace them, guess what? Now you have two people in FTE count. So that's kind of neat. But that's for a different slide. And again, you're not required to reserve a position for someone who refuses to come back. So we'll talk a little bit about the IRS, because this is going to probably get a little hairier as time goes on. But here is in your accounting how you would account for your PPP loan. First thing is it's going to go on your loan on your balance sheet like any other loan. So you're going to debit cash because you got cash, and then you're going to put the credit in the loan. And then as you incur expenses, you're going to book them into your income statement. You always book expenses. So it won't be, any different than what you're doing now. And then your PPP forgiveness, once you get a forgiveness document, then what they forgive will get switched over to income. So your transaction then is you're going to debit the loan and you're going to credit other income, which will be what the amount is forgiven. And then at some point, prior to that, you will have booked enough expenses to grant that amount for forgiveness. So that will become a zero-sum game on your income statement. So in the sense, it will not be taxed. Here becomes the problem. Now, if you wait for the 24 weeks, it appears now that you won't be able to apply for forgiveness until after the first of the year, because the new decision date is going to be December 31st for you. So you will have expenses in 2020 and income offsetting those expenses in the term of loan forgiveness in 2021. This problem is already known. They're already talking to the IRS about how they're going to do it. Is there going to be some kind of statement or something in your tax return? Are they going to allow the PPP loan forgiveness amount, a lot like contributing to your IRA after the first of the year? Is that going to be something that you're going to be able to kind of push back into 2020 so it offsets itself correctly on taxes? How they're going to handle that yet has not been determined, but it is an existing problem if you decide to wait to do forgiveness until after January 1st, because your expenses will have incurred in 2020 and your forgiveness will be in 2021. So that could be an issue. Again, they're dealing with it on the Hill already. So we should get some guidance on that, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So again, when the loans first came out, the language talked about incurred or paid during the forgiveness period. They've changed that language to incurred and paid during the forgiveness period. So the example would be if you got your loan on April 30th and you run semi-monthly payrolls. So your payroll runs from April 16th to April 30th and it's paid out, let's say May 5th. That payday on May 5th, even though it was for time in April, will count against your forgiveness. So since it was paid after the date that you got your money. And then any time that was incurred during the 8 weeks, again, if you stay on the 8-week period, would also count. Now, the same will be true on the 24-week period, is that'll start from the date of your loan, and then you push that out, for a different 24-week period. Now, this because the complication, if you choose the 24-week period, right now, the documentation says that you can select a different start date as long as the end date is no later than December 31st. So you can stay with your original loan start date and go 24 weeks from there. You can wait a couple weeks and go 24 weeks from there. You can start December 31st and count back 24 weeks. So there is some flexibility there in the way that the rules are written right now. And so again, I talked about a couple options here, and I alluded to a little bit earlier. Option one is just align your PPP. Oh no, I'm sorry, this is different. The the two options of how you do payroll cycles. One is if you can align your PPP forgiveness with your payroll cycle, and this is only for people who are biweekly or more frequent, where you instead of saying my loan date was April 30th, and I'm going to do paid and incurred, I'm going to say my pay starts from May 1st to May 15th, and that's going to be my pay schedule. So you can align it with your payroll cycle, or you can use paid or incurred. And quite frankly, aligning with your payroll schedule might be easier to calculate. And if you decide to extend to the 24-week period, that might make some sense. But paid and incurred gives you a larger opportunity to put more money in your forgiveness pool. And then again, that last block, it should be IRA, 401k, healthcare, all count towards your payroll number. Rent is part of the other, so that is actually shouldn't be on that line. Okay, so talk a little bit about full-time equivalents, because in your loan forgiveness, you have to do two things. You have to hit the money numbers that we've been talking about, and now you have to hit the number of employee numbers. So first thing to say is whatever you put on your loan application has nothing to do with your full-time equivalent. Your full-time equivalent now has been defined as based on 40 hours a week. The period of forgiveness is based on a base period, and then the number of full-time FTEs restored to historic levels by June 30th if you're on the 8-week plan, or December 31st if you're on the 24-week plan. So, excuse me. So on that day and only that day, it's a snapshot in time, did I have as many full-time equivalents as I did in my base period? So how do we calculate the base period? If you're a seasonal shop, then you can use any 12-week period between May 1st and September 30th of last year. Or if you're not seasonal, and this also seasonal employees can use these two as well, but if you're not seasonal, you're governed to February 15th last year to June 30th, your average full-time equivalent, or January and February this year, the average full-time equivalent. And seasonal employees can use those as well. So basically you pick the period that gives you the lowest full-time equivalent, just kind of do the math on all of them, and then come back and say, okay, my FTE, my best period or lowest full-time equivalent base period was January and February 2020, and that number is 5.8. So how you calculate your base period is you take the total number of hours worked by all employees and divide it by what would be 40 hours a week. Now, in your forgiveness period, you're going to calculate full-time equivalent employee by employee. And I'll tell you why this makes more sense. You can calculate it the other way if you want, but it actually isn't good for you in the math. Every employee that works for you, first off, gets rounded up to the nearest 10th. Any employee that's less than 20 hours a week gets rounded up to 0.5. So if you have an employee that comes in and works 2 hours a day for you, they're 0.5. So, that may be 8 or 10 hours a week, they're still half-time. So if you're having a hard time getting your FTEs, my suggestion is on your decision date, just June 30th if you're 8 weeks, December 31st if you're on the 12-week plan, hire yourself a bunch of very part-time people, and each one of them will count as a half FTE. We talked a little bit about who gets counted even if they don't come to work. So if an employee refuses to come back for rehire, they count. You just have to have a document showing that you offered them a job and they did not come back. If an employee is fired for cause, they count. And the person that you replace them with does not count, right? If an employee voluntarily resigns, they count. So if an employee refuses to rehire, they count, and the person that you hire in their place counts. If an employee is fired for cause, you only get to count one, and the same thing with a resignation, you only get to count one. But let's say you have someone that is a full-time employee is fired for cause, and you replace them with a part-time employee, you get to use the greater of the good there. If you fire a part-time for cause, replace them with a full-time employee, again, use the full-time equivalent. So calculating forgiveness, it's going to be the same whether it's 8 weeks or 24 weeks. The only difference is 24 weeks gives you an opportunity to amass more dollars over a period of time. So the simple way to do it is to do it with 100% payroll, because then you don't have to worry about, did I hit my numbers? Did I get my 60-40 relationship? But if you don't do it in 100% payroll, then at least 60% needs to be in payroll. So as long as you get past 60%, and then you can show that your rent and utilities make up for the difference to get to 100%, then you're good. If there's any question, especially with folks like me and Mindy and the rest that are home businesses, 100% payroll is really the easiest way to go. I'm making an assumption, because no one has answered the question yet, that when you are a home-based business, generally on your tax return, you take a home office exclusion. Is that the way you can calculate rent against PPP? We don't know. So any of those areas that seem to be gray or wishy-washy or whatever that may not pan out for you, my suggestion is to make it up in payroll. So for some of us that went through the process of doing this loan, and how we got the loan wasn't explicit that it was based on our tax returns for last year, forgiveness may be a little bit more complicated. So for us, probably extending to the 24-week period and using last year's numbers and just stretching that out to a bigger number probably is what's going to make sense. And in both cases, fully documenting and restoring your FTEs is paramount. So, and I'll give the example. Let's say you had 10 FTEs last year, and during the period, the 8 or the 12 weeks period, you spend 100% of your PPP money on payroll, but the full-time equivalent, when you get done, you only restore it to 8. You will get 80% of it forgiven, and 20% of it you'll have to pay back. Even though you spend 100% of the money on payroll, and you can show that you spent the money, the FTEs will be the deciding factor. So it's the lesser of the two. Likewise, if you restored all your full-time equivalents, but only spent 80% of the money, again, you would only get 80% forgiveness. So be cognizant of the fact that you have to hit both of those benchmarks. Okay, so here's these potential reductions. Now, I didn't change this slide when they came out with the new rules on Wednesday. Not achieving payroll expense of 60%, up until Wednesday, it was nothing forgiven. Now it is a portion. If you get 50%, then you would be forgiven, but at a lesser amount. Not achieving the FTE count is a partial reduction based on that percentage, as I just explained. Salary reduction. So if you reduce someone's salary greater than 25% of what they were making the previous year, then that is a partial reduction. And if you reduce someone's hourly rate more than 25% of what they were making last year, that will be a partial reduction based on the percentage of that reduction. Again, you don't have to reduce their rate. If you reduce their hours, that doesn't count. Only the rate. So hourly is a little bit different. Reducing someone's rate actually would not be in your best interest. But if you have to cut their hours to keep the cost down, then that doesn't hurt you. So in this salary piece, there is a kind of a neat way to calculate someone's annualized salary for last year, and I'll go into that in a minute. And Melanie, I'm going to finish in 5 minutes so we can go to the other thing, and then we can do questions after that. Okay, so we'll talk about some safe harbors. In FTEs, the safe harbor is determine what your FTE was on February 15th, get the average between February 15th and April, compare. If 2 is higher than 1, then you get safe harbor on FTE. You don't have to do any more calculations on FTE. So that's kind of neat if that works for you. If it doesn't, then you have to calculate FTEs as I was talking about earlier. Safe harbor on wages. And here's your rules. Again, it's the same kind of thing. Determine your annualized salary during the covered period. Determine the annualized salary on a given date. And then divide step 1, 2. If it's greater than 75%, then you don't need a safe harbor because you didn't reduce, or you've hit the numbers, and you didn't reduce someone's salary. If you did reduce salaries, then you have the safe harbor. Take your salary on the 15th, the salary between the 15th and the 26th again. If 2 is less than 1, then safe harbor, and you don't have to do anything else. All you need to do at that point is just restore them back to their wages. Now, this is only if you reduced someone's wages or salary. Then you would just have to restore them back by your decision date, which would be June 30th on the 8 weeks or December 31st on the 12 weeks. And now, creating an annualized salary for 2019. If you are the kind of person who pays bonuses like Christmas or something like that, you can take the week that the bonus was paid, you can annualize that week of 2019. There is a chance that that week might annualize them greater than 100%. So if you did reduce their salary, they don't count anymore. So anybody who made more than $100,000 last year, you can reduce their salary all you want, and there is no restriction or reduction for that. Okay, so forgiveness period changed from 8 to 24 weeks. Initially, when this came out, we didn't know if it could be somewhere in between, but it's either the original 8 or it's 24. You have those two choices. The FTE hard date changed June 30th to December 31st. Are you still bound by June 30th if you stay on the 8-week path? Yes. If you extend the forgiveness, you are bound by December 31st date. And will the safe harbor rules stay the same? As far as we know, yes. If you go to 24 weeks, probably won't need them. But, that's what we know at this point. And I am at the question stage, but I think we're too close to our next presenter. So we'll have to switch gears and then come back to questions after that.
Yes, so thank you so much for that. That was a lot of information. I know there's going to be questions that are coming around. I've seen some through the chat. I'm going to switch over to Leslie Dahlkemper. I saw her join, and I asked her if she could join us to give us some updates on the grant, the Jefferson County grant. She has to get off pretty soon after that, and then we'll come back to answer any of the questions that you might have from the PPP. So if you have any questions, you can put them in chat. I'll go through those. And then at some point when we're done with that, if you want to raise your hand, we can also do the chat. You can raise your hand through the chat, and I'll call on you from there. Leslie, Commissioner Dahlkemper, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know you're crazy busy with all kinds of meetings, so I appreciate you making the time for us.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. Good morning, Conifer Chamber. It's good to be here with you. I'm really sorry about the time crunch. I know we're all moving 1,000 miles per hour. Melanie, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the business grants. Before I do that, I just have to give Melanie a huge shout out. As your chamber president, she has been extraordinary in terms of her leadership, in terms of advocating for local businesses, making sure that the issues you're sharing with her are issues that are on our radar screen, and most importantly, that we're responding to those issues. So huge thanks to Melanie, and also to all of our chamber presidents who've worked really hard on our business recovery task force at the county level, which they recommended to commissioners, and we thought it was an excellent idea, and that task force has been meeting weekly. So a little bit about the small business grants. As many of you know, Jefferson County received $101.7 million in CARES Act money. those dollars from the U.S. Treasury can only be used for COVID-19 related expenses. And the Board of County Commissioners made it a top priority to get those dollars back into the hands of our community as soon as we possibly could. That meant small businesses, our cities. It also meant nonprofits like MRC and ECHO, who are working very hard in our communities as well. We have grants for our local nonprofits, and also helping Jeffco Schools continue its grab and go meals during the summer. There's a location this summer at Conifer High School, if I'm not mistaken. So on the business grant program, particularly, we earmarked $5 million in available funds for small locally owned businesses with a physical location. Each grant is a maximum of $5,000 for businesses. We heard some really helpful reactions from local businesses and our chamber presidents once those grants launched and the applications went live. And I even had an opportunity last Saturday. It feels like it was last summer, but it was really only a week ago, to pound the pavement and knock on doors of local businesses in South Jeffco and in Morrison. And as you know, I have the honor of representing Conifer and District 3. And one of the big pieces of feedback that we heard, and Melanie and others heard, is that 2 full-time FTEs does not help the mom and pop business that has only one owner, but may bring on some additional help as needed or as it's seasonally needed. So we reduce that from 2 to 1. So the minimum full-time employee is 1, which I think, fingers crossed, will be very helpful for those of you who are here today and represent that kind of business. The other thing we did is we extended the deadline to June 30th to provide more time, but we also want to make sure that those businesses that have already applied that are eligible start to get those dollars very soon. Another important component of the grant and eligibility criteria specifically is that these are for businesses, as I mentioned, with a physical location in unincorporated Jefferson County. We did distribute CARES Act money to our local cities like Arvada, Lakewood, and others, and many of those have put forward grants for businesses in their city. Some quick information about the criteria. This is also on our website, and I know Melanie has the link and can share more too if you're interested, but just some other highlights I'd share. The business has been operating since March 26th of 2019. It is not a home-based business, although we've talked about looking at consulting kinds of businesses and others in the next wave of grants. Must be for profit, of course, independently owned local business. And while we talked about the minimum number of employees at 1, no more than 49 full-time equivalent positions. Last but not least, corporately owned national chains are not eligible for the grant unless you are an individually owned franchise operator with 49 or less employees total. So I wanted to mention that as well. There's more information on our website about how to apply for the grant and what you'll be required to submit and show. Happy to touch on that if that's helpful. And if you have any specific questions, you can certainly reach out to Melanie, or please feel free to reach out to our Business and Workforce Development Center at businessservices@jeffco.us. That's businessservices@jeffco.us.
Thank you, Leslie.
You bet.
And real quick, Jefferson County variance, or Jefferson County received the approval on the variance from Colorado. And can you give a little bit of an update on what that variance means? And then that next, our county attorney yesterday on a meeting was talking about submitting another variance for next week potentially. And that was one of the things I wanted to talk about this morning to businesses. If there is a portion of a business or your business is not fully open, please let us know, because I'd love to see if we can include that on the variance. Of course, variances are not easy to get, and there's a lot of time and work to go into those. And so I want to make sure if there's something that we can get on this next round that we can submit it to our county attorney to try to get that pushed through.
Thanks, Melanie. I agree completely. If there are issues that you want to raise with Kim Sorrells, who is our county attorney, working through Melanie, the sooner we know what those requests are, the better. There's also a planning component of this. We've had a number of restaurants and businesses in District 3, the district that I represent, come forward with plans in terms of how they would follow safety guidelines if capacity was increased. But to Melanie's question specifically about the variance that was granted, we were very happy to see that Jeffco's variance was granted. There were a couple of modifications that the state included in that variance. One of the other issues that the state looks at very closely are COVID-19, the county's COVID-19 related data. And currently we have about 140 cases over a 2-week period, or about 10 cases a day. If that increases, and this is really important to underscore, to 580 cases over a 2-week period, then the state comes back in and says, look, we've got to shut some things down again. We do not want to go in that direction. I know none of us wants to go in that direction. So I can't underscore enough how important it is to continue to do what we know we need to do so well, right, in terms of face coverings and washing our hands and socially, physically distancing. And I just want to thank all of the businesses who are doing an extremely good job on this front. Thank you for your efforts to keep your staff safe and to keep our community safe as well. So on the variance request that we had received, it addresses a number of areas, and there's more detailed information on our website, but just to give you an idea, it focuses on everything from gathering size to places of worship, gyms, indoor retail malls, outdoor recreation, brew pubs, distilleries, graduations, outdoor museums and educational experiences, event centers. And on that note, we've been working very closely with our event centers because we know that they too, like other businesses, have been hit very hard by this pandemic. And we're trying to do some additional work, I think, in this next variance to help them too. The county's variance allows certain things that are not yet in state order. For example, gatherings. Indoor settings can have up to a 50% occupancy, or 50 people, whichever is less, in each confined indoor space. The outdoor settings allow for up to 125 people. So we've been working very closely with Melanie and other chamber presidents and our planning and zoning team and others to come up with a plan for restaurants so they can expand that capacity in outdoor areas. And we know how critical that is to their well-being. We've heard from a number of restaurants that 50% capacity just doesn't help, but if we can expand it outdoors, that can make a big difference. Indoor malls can begin to open with a plan approved by Jefferson County Public Health. Graduations can take place with a plan approved also by Public Health. And gyms or places for personal recreation can have up to 50% occupancy, or 50 people, whichever is less, in each confined indoor space. So those are a couple of highlights that I would share with you. I'm just skimming through my notes quickly to see if there's more. I think we've covered it. We do have on our website a copy of the state's public health order. It's an annotated version to show where the Jeffco variance approvals interact with the state order. And that also is on our website. And then we have a quick one-page fact sheet too that goes into more depth about those different categories I mentioned and what the variance means for those categories. So I hope that's helpful, and I can also email this to Melanie, but knowing Melanie, she's got all these links already, so I can share them with
Well,
you.
thank you, Leslie. I appreciate you coming on and sharing all of the updates. The one comment I saw before you jump off is the request to make the grant for home-based businesses. And I know that we've been talking about that in the business task force, as the county commissioners have been talking about that as well, as far as phase 2. So just another reiteration of that. We would love to see that next round.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we talked about was making sure that we were ready in the second phase to look at home-based businesses and to be nimble and responsive to that as soon as possible. So we're watching to see how this round of grants goes for small businesses. And the response, honestly, has been a little bit slow. We're hoping that with some of those tweaks I mentioned earlier, we'll see an increase in response, but we are ready to start that second phase sooner rather than later with home-based businesses.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Leslie. I know it's 9:10, so you got to jump off. Thank you very much. If you all have any questions for Leslie, you can send them directly to her or send them to me and I'll pass them on. But thanks, Leslie. We appreciate having you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, Brian, did you get enough time to catch your breath?
Yeah, and I apologize. I really kind of zipped through the last few slides there because I realized that Leslie was coming on. I wanted to try to get through the material first. And I was looking at some of the questions in chat. I don't know if I can see them all, but if you don't mind, I'll just dive into what I was looking
go
at.
right ahead. And if I see
Um,
one that's not covered, or if there's a hand, somebody that wants to talk and raise their hand through the chat, go ahead and do that, and I'll call on you in a minute.
Yeah, so from Studio at 7199, do we need to bring back the same amount of full-time employees prior to COVID-19? And yes, with the caveat that they have created those periods that you calculate your pre-2019 FTEs. So it wasn't what you put on your application. It is what, if you're seasonal, any 12-week period between May 1st and September 30th of last year. If you're not seasonal, or even if you are seasonal, then you can use February 15th to June 30th last year as your FTE average, or January and February FTE average from this year as your base. And then you need to restore that number if you're on the 8-week plan by June 30th and on the 24-week plan by December 31st. And remember that the restoration is a 1-day snapshot. So you could actually hire someone for like that last week of June or the last week of December to hit the FTE numbers. There's nothing that says that doesn't work. It's a little fluey, I guess, for lack of a better non-term, but it is the fact. So realistically, you should go all out to try to get your FTE numbers. And even if that means that you're doing something that feels a little distasteful to yourself, it's certainly within the rules. There was another question in here about S Corp and K1 from Eileen Konigsberg. So if you're an S Corp and have a K1 from last year and W-2s, is it okay to just focus on the W-2s and the payroll costs? Certainly. You don't have to drag more costs into the game unless you need to have them for the purpose of forgiveness. So if your W-2s are adequate enough to grant forgiveness, then use those. If they're not, then start looking for other costs to bring to the table. But honestly, if you use just W-2 data and you're shy of it over the 8-week period, switch to the 24-week period, add up more numbers, and you're going to be forgiven. The good thing is if you're forgiven, it really doesn't make a difference how long it takes to get to the forgiveness period because you're not going to pay anything back. If you're not going to be forgiven, and regardless whether you go to the 8 or 24-week period, it actually, I think, probably makes more sense to go ahead and apply and, kind of take your medicine, either give them the money back or get the loan started, because then you have more months of payment to make that payment lower. But quite frankly, if you play with the rules that they have in place and go to the 24-week period, there really shouldn't be any reason to not to achieve 100% forgiveness. Okay, so there's another question here. Studio at 7199, 3 FTEs prior to PPP. We're not going to hire back the third employee, so we're just going to have 2 for forgiveness. Can we just calculate 60-40 and then get 66%? Yes, you can do that, meaning that you'll take the hit for 1/3 FTE and have to pay back 33%. Again, on that decision date, June 30th or December 31st, if you hire 2 people who work an hour a day, that's 1 FTE. So there's really no reason to take this hit. Have someone come in and clean or police the area around the building part-time for just 1 pay period, and they will count. So, I basically, would beseech you not to take the hit, because there are ways around it where you can spend a little bit of money and get a lot more forgiveness in return. Let me see, did I see? I didn't see any other questions. I'm going to hit send on my email address. So if you think of questions after the fact, you can definitely email me, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Melanie. And then if anyone has questions that they just want to voice out to me, this is a good time for that.
Excellent. Well, Brian, I like the creative accounting. Very important and very beneficial. So thank you for that. Let's see. I had one question I was looking for, but right now Studio is raising their hand. So I go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in.
Hi, Melanie. It's me, Shelley Houston. I don't know why that studio's coming up. That's my personal email address. So
Oh.
if you were confused about who that was.
No problem. Good morning, Shelley. Glad you could join us.
Hi. So I had the question about, we were three full-time employees. We were contemplating letting go the third employee before all this happened. So we didn't want to bring him back for just a couple of weeks and then let him, we just didn't feel like that was the right thing to do. So now, as I understand, could we hire like our son to work for a week and that would count as our third full-time employee? I mean, I don't want to do anything underhanded, but.
No, I mean, a lot of it's kind of like the IRS when you do your taxes. I mean, they have certain loopholes in there, and they're there for you to take advantage of. These loopholes are intentional. It is creative accounting, but it's not my creative accounting. It really comes down from the guidance from the Department of Treasury. So if you do hire, it doesn't make a difference who it is. It could be your mom or your sister or your brother or your son. To fill that position, and it only has to be filled technically for that one day. So it is quite unusual that's the rule, but there's no clarification, and has been asked and answered several times that the FTE count has to be restored on this day.
Okay, so if we extend then to the 12 weeks, or was it 24 weeks? 24 weeks.
Yeah, if you extend to 24 weeks, then the decision date will be December 31st.
Okay. And so then when we apply for forgiveness, they're just going to ask you at any time during that 24 weeks, did you have 3 full-time employees?
No, they're going to ask you, what is your FTE count on December 31st?
Oh, okay.
So you would need to bring them back on the pay period that matches up December 31st as a full-time employee.
Okay.
But technically, it only has to be for the one day. I don't really know how that works out so well. I would assume that you would have to pay them for full-time for the entire pay period.
Right.
Because that's how your documentation, they're going to ask for a payroll record.
Right. And so then we have the 24 weeks of just paying the 2 employees, and that would still add up to our 60% of the full amount of the loan.
Right. Yeah, you're gonna hit the money numbers just because of the extended period, and then and hang on a second, I gotta shut my phone off. So what I have suggested to people to do in your case is, in that last pay period at the end of the month, actually submit an offer letter that is received from a full-time employee, put them on payroll, and pay them. If you fire them on January 1st, so be it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, great, thank you.
One other question that I see here from Mary with Conifer Physical Therapy was about I just lost it. It was applying for the PPP, and if you hadn't heard anything, what you should do. Mary, if you're on, I just lost your question. Oh, here it is. If you have already applied for the grant, when will you hear something? Any idea on that, Brian?
Yeah, so, well, the applications for PPP are through your bank. So if it's been an extended period of time and you haven't heard back, then I would reach out to your local banker. Like Carla at Bank of the West, give her a call, and then she can try to run down in the system. Obviously, Carla is not the one that's giving out the loans at Bank of the West, but she is a good point of contact that will help you do that if that's your bank or whomever would be your banker at the local bank. I would reach out to them.
Okay.
Most people who applied, like in the beginning, their loans have already been done. But like say if it is still open to reapply and to apply. So if there's something wrong, or there was something wrong with your original application for whatever you were turned down, you can reapply. And if you haven't gotten something, your only avenue is to talk to the bank where you put in your application.
Okay. And Mary, if you're referring to the Jeffco business grant, because I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but if you are talking about the Jeffco business grant, I know that they were starting to process those funds this week, or not, I'm sorry, not this week, next week, beginning of next week. So they should be cutting checks, I think potentially next week. So hopefully you'll start to hear something then. And one thing I didn't get a chance to do is, Brian, I didn't really introduce your business is Pantheon Solutions. You're here locally in Conifer. You work from out of your home, which we're thrilled to have you. And I'm thrilled to make just the connection of another person in Conifer, another business in Conifer. But if you want to give a brief intro to your business, just so people kind of have a background of what you're doing. And I know you were kind enough to just say that you're willing to be a resource here for others outside of this meeting today. So thank you for that, but share a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, no problem. As you guys probably already can tell, I love to talk. So given another opportunity is great. So Pantheon Solutions is, I run it right out here in my house here on Conifer Mountain. I live on Nancy's Lane, and love being able to look out into the woods and to the deer and the occasional bear on my work days. So this is great because for the last 15 years or so, I have been commuting either across Denver or from here into Denver. My last job, I worked for a company called Reliascent, great firm. They're located in Westminster, Colorado. I was driving to Westminster every day. It was great. But it is a fantastic firm. And Reliascent does basically the same things that I do now on my own. But what I decided is I wanted to focus on small upstart businesses that had very limited funds. So being able to have a home-based business where my overhead is very low, my rates can be lower, and I can help home-based businesses. Primarily what Pantheon helps home-based businesses do is navigate the waters of government contracting. So we are an accounting firm, but we specialize in firms that are under contract or subcontract with big firms like Lockheed or Ball, or have direct small business innovative research grants from the government or National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health. So that's what we do. And we, kind of, wind through all of the regulatory guidance in the government and advise our clients on how to work with the government and get through all their audits and pass all that stuff. So that's what we do. We love helping small businesses. We have small businesses that are not government related, which is one of the reasons that we reach out through Boulder SBDC so that we can help out small businesses that may not otherwise, get help because quite frankly, small business development centers, for the most part, their services are free. Mine are not. And some companies, quite frankly, just can't afford my services. So we try to offer them through SBDC for those who couldn't get the resources otherwise.
Excellent. And now you're specializing in the PPP. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that, when we took on the PPP, Dan King and myself, we also took on EIDL. So if you have questions about EIDL loans, there's less information to offer up, but I can potentially help you there. So again, I put my email on here. You can talk to me there. If you have a quick question you want to ask now, I suppose it's okay.
Yeah, excellent. So if you do have questions, you can raise your hand. We'll get to you. And Brian has his contact information in the chat box. I can send that out as well. I am recording this the meeting this morning, so I will post that onto the member portal for you to check out, or I can email that link to you if you have any questions, and you can get his contact information from there as well. We are going to switch over to Zoom, or the breakout sessions. I know it's close to 9:30. Some people are very excited about the breakout sessions and networking, so I don't want to overlook that. And before I do that, Denise Bromberger with Image Marketing Specialist has been a part of the relaunch committee, and we have been reaching out to our local publications from My Mountain Town, Macaroni Kid, the Flume, Canyon Courier, all of the local publications in different formats to find out what their specials are, because a lot of them are having some marketing deals right now that they don't normally offer. And so if you're interested in that, it's a great opportunity. I think, Denise, if you can upload them onto your system. I have not been able to share anything to here. But if you can push that up on there, or I will send it out later. We can do an e-blast with a summary of today's meeting. And we can push that out in a minute. So with that being said, Brian, thank you so much for being on the call this morning. That was a lot of information. It was great information. You did a fantastic job presenting that. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise.